if the progressive movement is to make a dent, we have to be in touch with our deepest, truest selves. And that means whether we're religious or spiritual or not, we have to have some practices that keep us grounded in hope, not anger, in love, not fear.
Hi, this is Frank Schaeffer, and you are watching and or listening to In Conversation with Frank Schaeffer, which is both a podcast, a Facebook Live event, goes on YouTube and many other places. And today I have a guest that I'm really looking forward to talking to, and that is Ordained Unitarian Universalist pastor Roger Butts, who is also an author of a book, Seeds of Devotion Weekly Contemplations on Faith, which I think is rather new, isn't it, Roger? When did that come out?
Well, that came out about 6 months ago. So it's
okay, not
it's
that
still pretty, it's kind of new.
Recent-ish. So are you in Colorado Springs?
I am in Colorado Springs.
And so you're a Unitarian sitting in Colorado Springs. And last time I checked, Colorado Springs was also home to a lot of right-wing evangelical Christians, or am I thinking of a different town?
I think you got the town right. Focus on the Family is here. A couple of other groups.
Yeah, and, a few years ago, I did an event at the public library there, and all kinds of people showed up who had once been involved with Focus on the Family or other evangelical groups, and it was like a room full of kind of subversive refugees, a little bit afraid to be seen there because it's sort of like a company town. I mean, it's the evangelical version of one of these Mormon towns in Utah. You got to belong to the local evangelical mafia or you have a problem there. And I'm being facetious, but kind of that was the feeling I got.
Well, we were glad to have you at that. And there was a wide range of hosts for that, sponsors for that event. But I was sure glad to have you here. There is a little underground here, the West Side downtown. There's also a changing demographic because it's getting so big. But yes, I've had we've had good luck with trying to bring in
people like me,
people like you.
But you filled the venue with me. I was very impressed. And didn't we go to some place, a local joint afterward, Beer and Hymns?
Beer and Hymns was afterwards.
Is it still going?
I don't know if Beer and Hymns is still going, but that coffee shop is going well. It's the Wild Goose Meeting House, which I think you were at Wild Goose.
I was just at the authentic real Wild Goose last week.
So, yes. And hey, listen, when we did a Howard Thurman film showing, and I think Reinhold Niebuhr too, we had New Life Church and All Souls Unitarian as co-sponsors. So we're really trying to
do me a favor because, and I know this is really, we're gonna do a real interview with you in a minute after I get this out of the way, but that I don't know what sort of COVID things you're doing in terms of Zoom meetings and everything with your church and with your group and with your events, but if you put together anything related to my new book, when it comes out November 2nd, I will jump on it because I remember that event that you all did out there fondly. That was one of the best audiences I've ever spoken to. There were a couple hundred people there, but they were so clued in and the questions were so smart. And I put that thing up on YouTube, and along, I think, with a talk I gave at Google Talks one time for Google, it probably has more views than anything else. I really loved it. In other words, as you know, because you do public speaking, you're no better than the audience.
Yes.
And when it comes to the Q&A, it's totally dependent on them. And I was so impressed with that group of people in Colorado Springs. So I beg you to do something for my new book. And I will be there. Even if it's you with 3 friends in a room, I'll be there and either come or do an online thing. I don't know what you could do about it, but I really would love to do another event with you.
What is your new book going to be? What's it called?
It's coming out November 2nd, and it is Fall in Love, Have Children, Stay Put, save the planet, be happy.
Oh, I see. Yeah, there's a poster behind
There's
you.
a poster behind me.
Oh,
And
yeah.
basically it charts my course out of the evangelical world in the forward. My editor insisted that I restate all that for people who haven't a clue about who, what the perspective is. But then it becomes a manifesto, very, very simple terms. What the book is about is saying, look, we have to stop allowing corporate America and the value of shareholders to dictate our lives, starting with the fact that let's refuse to be identified by our job and our career, and instead identify people by the quality of their human relationships.
Yes.
So it's right on it's very much on your turf in terms of Seeds of Devotion, what you do as a Unitarian minister. You are a chaplain, working with people, and you must have noticed that there are all sorts of people who have the wrong idea of success and therefore are unhappy. And so essentially my book isn't a call to some higher state of being, as in do this because it's right. It's a call to experience joy in life, which in my case comes from taking care of my 3 youngest grandchildren every day, not from some career or money related thing. So it challenges the values of our day and age with what I would call real family values rather than the fake family values that I was selling in the 70s and 80s, which was just thinly packaged misogyny. So it's I'll send you a PDF so you can read it. And when we're done with this today, and then I would just ask you to take a look and think about what you do in Colorado Springs, and maybe you and I could do something together.
Oh, that would be wonderful.
Like a joint something, just you and me, because what we're doing really meshes. So I'd like to spend the whole hour talking about my new book, but this is about you. I want to say again, this is Roger Butts, ordained Unitarian Universalist pastor, author of Seeds of Devotion, weekly contemplations on faith. So Roger, what are you up to now? Because you've done many things, you write and you're a chaplain. How do you use your time these days?
Well, right now I am helping All Souls Church, which is a Unitarian Universalist church, historic church in Colorado Springs, with a transition. The previous pastor moved to New York City and became the head of the Ethical Society there in Manhattan. And so they're in between ministers, and I'm helping along with 2 other pastors. And I'm also putting out another book about praying the poets, about using poetry as a spiritual practice. So what those 2 books have in common is what I'm trying to do is what you're trying to do, and that is re-enchant the world, re-magicify the world, to see the sacred in the everyday, whatever metaphors you use for the sacred, to try to find a way to wake up enough to find that joy, to find that beauty, to find that compassion. And that's what Seeds of Devotion is. I took 20 years of ministry and my favorite stories from 20 years of ministry. And I was like, I think I have about 52 moderately good stories. I think that makes a year, one a week. And then I added a prayer, which I love to write prayers. And then I added some reflection questions, and that's the book.
And let me ask you a question. How does that come out of, I think you did tidbits from Buddha, Jesus, Muhammad, and then there were people like Dorothy Day, Thomas Merton, as I remember. What was that book about, and what's the gap, and how do they fit together?
The Seeds of Devotion is Seeds of Devotion is me literally gathering my favorite stories, and sometimes they involve the hospital where I worked for 7 years, and
you were chaplain there.
I was a chaplain at a local Catholic hospital. And some of those are about COVID. Some of the stories are about COVID. So, people ask me all the time, where did you see God in this last year and a half? And I talk about the fact that I saw God in these nurses who would put on these personal protective equipment for loved ones, knowing that that was the last time those loved ones were going to see their partner or their parent. And at 1 o'clock in the morning, taking the personal protective equipment off For me, that's God enough. I don't know what else you would want for a God, but that's the embodiment of God for me. And then there's like a story about the death of the Buddha, and the Buddha saying, like, I've done my thing. Now it's your turn to shine like a light.
Yeah.
Muhammad's night journey, all these different stories that I love.
Yeah. When you work as a chaplain in a hospital, you're saying you were there for 7 years. So how were you there in terms of the COVID pandemic, or when was that? I've lost track of.
I left about a month ago.
Oh, okay. So this is really recent.
Yeah, this is this book includes some of those
COVID stories.
Hospital stories, and it includes how to approach people when.
Hold the cover up again, because I want people to see it. I've got a copy here, but I want you to take a look here at these contemplative passages. And right up through the COVID period. I think that, that's such a useful thing. And then in terms of the prayers, do me a favor. Why don't you, we're going to get into the discussion here, but be thinking about one of the prayers that you would like to read us, that you would like to share with us at some point in this, because I would like folks to hear sort of the essence of your thinking. And I think the prayers are where we're going to find who you are better than anything else in the book.
So let me just share with you really quickly what I learned about walking into a room where somebody may be dying, or somebody may have found out that they have cancer, or they may have found out that there's no more treatment. I'll read this prayer, and this comes after the story, Thank You, God, for Everything, in which I met this 95-year-old woman who was about to go to hospice. And the nurse called me and said, her family is gone. They're not here right now. It's late at night. Will you come up and just sit with her? She's a little confused. I said, sure. And I walk towards the door, and the nurse says, oh, by the way, Roger, she's just in there muttering the Lord's Prayer, the Our Father. And I was like, all right. So I sat down, and sure enough, she was. And she noticed me as she's saying, give us this day our daily bread. She somehow noticed me amidst her confusion. And she looks at me and says, oh dear, I seem to have forgotten the end of that prayer, but thank you, God, for everything. It was such a beautiful ending to that prayer. So this is the prayer that comes after that story. First, walk gently. You're entering into the great mystery. Sorrow, regret, anger, grief, relief, you'll never know what you'll find. You may as well walk gently into that room, which will likely be dark and quiet. Second, talk gently. The dead dream, and the survivors do too. They're in a fog or out to sea or in the deep woods. Pick your image, but talk gently. That mystery will one day be you and yours. Third, act gently. Your gentleness will invite whatever needs to happen. If at all possible, make it so the wife, husband, mother, child hardly knows you're there. Listen gently. Listen with your eyes and your ears, and mostly the heart. The stories will come. Be there to hear them. Stories remind the wife that she is still alive and is alone, and is not alone all at once. Be the Spirit or Jesus or Muhammad or the Buddha. Pick your guide and be that person. Mary, Dorothy Day, Thomas, Merton, it matters not. Of course, you are the best option. So be you in all your quirky, unexpected, beautiful, flawed, perfect essence. Amen.
Great. Yeah.
That's how you enter a room.
That's a good prayer and a good instruction at the same time. Yeah, may we all be that way to everyone we interact with.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's really lovely. So when you left this job to being the hospital chaplain a month ago, having gone through the COVID pandemic, as part of that, what was your next step? Or are you looking for one, or you're being, what are you up to now besides the writing and all the rest of it?
Yeah, I'm working at All Souls in this transitional ministry, and now I'm about to there are a couple of other opportunities. I'm helping a funeral home, and there are a couple of other opportunities that are out there that I'm not quite ready to announce yet.
Yeah.
It's been nice. And my wife is a minister as well. She's in the United Church of Christ, and she's continuing her ministry in the Black Forest of Colorado Springs.
Yeah.
So we're doing good. We're doing good out here.
One thing I'd be curious about, I forget, forgive me, I should remember this, but what was your own personal spiritual journey?
Yeah.
As you know, I come from a fundamentalist evangelical background. I left it. I moved towards a more progressive Christianity and politics as well.
Yes.
Something about my journey. Could you just tell me a little bit about, starting off, who you were as a child, how that developed, because you're a minister now and a hospital chaplain, but you weren't born that. I mean, where do you come from?
I come from Galesburg, Illinois. I grew up in Galesburg, Illinois, a small town in the Midwest, home of Carl Sandburg, the poet, one of my heroes.
Sure.
He was feisty. I have a sermon called The Feisty Sandburg, I love Carl Sandburg. If the church doors were open at the Baptist church where I grew up, we were there. And we took it seriously. My dad was a gentle man, a sweet guy, and he was a Baptist through and through from North Carolina. And my mom, very kind of open-minded, very kind of gentle and sweet in her own right, very resilient. But I grew up in that time, and I don't know who's behind this, Frank. I don't know if you were behind this or somebody else, but I went to a church that was conservative. I went to a church that was full of good people. I still have so much admiration for my youth pastor, who was a good man, is still a good man. And I'm still friends with a lot of the people in my youth group, but good people and scary, shameful, you're a worm and you're nothing more than a worm. And the only way to save you is to think of Jesus as being on that cross, dying for your particular sins. And I remember a couple of stories from growing up. It was like I watched some movie where there was a pilot and he was in a plane and there were all these people in the plane, and then the rapture happened and like the plane fell down. I've spent my whole life worried about if I'm going to die in a plane because the rapture. Now I love the bumper sticker that says, after the rapture, can I have your car? Right. Yeah. but it scared the hell out of me.
Yeah. So you come from that background, and then what point did you transition? And then you went to college where, and then just go to the next step. Then what happened?
So I went to Appalachian State in the mountains of North Carolina. I had an uncle who taught there, and it was wonderful. It was a wonderful place to be. My roommate was gay, so everything I had thought was all of a sudden up in the air. And I started reading James Joyce and Garcia Marquez, and I was like, oh, I don't think I'm Baptist anymore, but what am I? My uncle Gary is a famous Baptist minister. He's been on Oprah, and he was loving and kind, and I love that man so much. And my uncle Archie was a minister. I took religion very seriously. I just didn't know what I was. And so I went to this Methodist pastor, and I swear to God, I went to this Methodist pastor in Boone, North Carolina, and I asked him all these questions. What about this? What about this? What about this? And out of either generosity of spirit or just to get rid of me because I was so stinking annoying, he said, Roger, there are plenty of Methodists here in this church who think like you, but it sounds like you're a Unitarian Universalist. There's a Unitarian church down the road. And it was like, 20 people, half of whom were like professors I knew.
Yeah.
And it was like close to Thanksgiving, and they were doing this communion service for indigenous people who had been slaughtered. And I was like, oh, this is my cup of tea. So I'm 21. I'm graduating from college. I've had this exposure, but I either want to be a Quaker, an Episcopalian, or a UU. And I went to this church in Greensboro, UU Church, and they had such beautiful interim ministers that I was like, oh, I'm gonna do this. And then I moved to DC. I worked on the Hill for a little bit and worked in politics. And even when I was working in politics, though, I was hanging out with a Catholic worker and All Souls Unitarian in DC, and all these people who were trying to bring justice to the foreground. And I ended up at Wesley Seminary after my dad died and after a breakup that was tough on me. I ended up in seminary, and I became a Unitarian Universalist like 35 years ago.
Yeah,
part of the UU Christian Fellowship.
And these days you're doing Eco-Spiritual Alliance for Climate Justice in Southern Colorado as well. So you've gotten into some other areas.
Doing all kinds of, And I organized against the death penalty for a year. It was wonderful. We came close, 8 years ago to ending the death penalty here, but we ended it last year, and I testified against it, and it was wonderful.
Someone had just commented listening to you to say thank you, Roger, and all healthcare workers for your ministry during this time of COVID. And of course, I heartily join that. Do me a favor, hold the book up again so folks can see the cover. Seeds of Devotion. And we've been talking about it, and I'm going to have you read a little more out of that. So pick another little passage you like, because I love to have an author read in their own voice. Sometimes I read bits of books, but I think it's better if you do it. You don't have to read it right this second, but just be thinking of something you'd like to flip to. One question I have for you as someone who went into the UU establishment, if I remember correctly, Abigail Adams, John Adams' wife, wasn't she sort of instrumental in the Unitarian history?
Oh yeah, John Quincy Adams, John Adams were both Unitarians. Emerson was a Unitarian. As soon as the Unitarians came about, Emerson and Thoreau and Channing and all those guys started a transcendentalist kind of revolt against it. But Emerson called Unitarians corpse cold Unitarians. So, it's a wonderful history, and
but I'm a big fan of Abigail Adams, and in that if you read her letters to John Adams, she is such an anti-slavery person, and she is berating other slaveholders, who were part of the beginning of the U.S. Most notably Jefferson, who she really takes to task. And he's off in Paris raping his 14-year-old, getting her pregnant, not freeing his slaves. There's a monument to him, which I don't think should be in Washington, by the way, in case anybody wants to get enraged with me. I think it should have been bulldozed decades ago. And then, Abigail Adams and these other people are forgotten. And I just want to make a point about that. Sometimes with people like Jefferson, we make the excuse, well, that was the time, as if no one at that period had a more developed conscience. Well, Abigail and John Adams stand in such stark opposition to his vision of slavery being okay. And she takes him to task. So the funny thing is, it's not like he didn't know there was another point of view, or have a life to model his upon. Because Abigail, to me, is the one who should have the monument in Washington.
I love it.
Not Jefferson. To hell with Thomas Jefferson. And I love these Southern writers who purport to be liberals, who write these hagiographies sort of biographies of him, have all these great things to say, and then always make this kind of excuse. And I always think of Abigail Adams and her stand, and what a shining light she was. And I think, to me, this speaks so well of her as one of the mothers of the Unitarian movement. And makes it so attractive to me. It's like, well, who started all this? Well, Abigail Adams was involved, and so was John Adams. Enough said. That's all I need to know. I'm very, very pro-Unitarian starting there. I don't know if that's a little melodramatic, but how do you feel about that?
Oh yeah, no, I mean the history there is fascinating, both in terms of Unitarian Universalists having to come to grips with our own complicity in those early days. And up until very recently, Jefferson was a UU model.
Well, sure, he wanted a reasonable Jesus, and so he cut all,
He cut all
used
the
his
crazy
nail scissors going through the Bible, making it more readable, blah, 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 and so forth and so on.
And I will tell you, Frank, I will tell you, and I don't know how you feel about this, but I have a chapter in the book called "Keep the Bible Weird."
Yeah.
I don't want to take out the weird stuff. I want to keep it in, because that's where you find, like, oh, I'm going to wrestle with this. I'm going to fight with this, and I'm not going to have like simple answers to like the
Speaking of which, as an author who has a nose for bestsellers, not that I always write them, some of my books plummet like a stone into a pond, but Keep the Bible Weird is the title of your next book if you want to write a book that just goes off the chart.
You think so?
Oh, yeah. Write a book called Keep the Bible Weird, and I will write the foreword for you.
Thank you, Frank.
Not that that'll help you any, but I love that. So let's riff on that. Talk to me about Keep the Bible Weird. I interrupted you, but I really want to hear what you got to say on it.
Well, it's just that chapter is just that. It's like Jefferson cut out all the weird parts and all the supernatural parts and all the strange parts and all the parts that would trip you up. But my favorite story in the whole of the Bible is the Transfiguration, right? Like, why would you get rid of the Transfiguration? So Jesus takes his best buddies up to the mountain, and all of a sudden, they're doing rituals, they're doing prayers, they're doing whatever, conversation. And Jesus starts glowing. Like, I want to know what that ritual is that makes Jesus start glowing, right? Yeah. And then, like, the prophet and the law comes and visits and says, hey, now the question becomes, what do you do with the fact that those two disappeared after the Holocaust, after, all the supersessionist bullshit? But you got to wrestle with it. And then what is God saying when God says, this is my beloved? Listen, well, what happens next? They walk down the mountain and go to the poor people. This is what makes somebody the beloved, right? Is not staying up there, but going with the poor and the ignored and the voiceless and blah, blah, blah. So that's why I want to keep the Bible weird, is because if there's a psalm that says, blessed are those who bash the baby against the rocks, right? I don't want to get rid of it. I want to know the parts of myself that also wish that my enemies would experience big loss.
Yeah, not to mention the sacrifice of Isaac.
Oh, right. Those are the ones.
My granddaughter Nora, when she's 7 now, but when she was 5, I was reading her that. I read her a lot of Greek mythology and I read her Bible stories, and I don't differentiate between the two, as in saying, this one's true and you've got to believe it or you're going to go to hell, and this one's just a story. I let the chips fall where they may.
Right. And
she just looked at me, glared at me across the room and said, that is a very stupid story. Yeah. And I didn't ask her opinion on it. That's a 5-year-old little girl hearing that story for the first time, saying, that is a very stupid story. So she needed the weird part to wake her up and react. Right. And I agree with you. I love that. Keep the Bible weird. So that's great. So
you're on board with that.
Yeah, I'm on board with that. Talk a little more about your kind of sense of who the Unitarians are today.
Yes.
In that, everybody keeps going through changes. We've just come through the Trump years, and we may face them again. We're in the middle of COVID. Your reaction to these crises is to be a hospital chaplain and help people. That's not everybody's reaction, but surely nothing in recent American history has so gone against the grain of what I think the Unitarian Church represents as the recent, I guess, I don't know how to put it more charitably than this, the disappearance of the evangelical witness altogether to be replaced by a personality cult revolving around one of the most horrible people in American history. And that's a pretty big history, but I don't think you can exaggerate that. No. And so you're a Unitarian minister standing on the sidelines watching the majority of people who identify as white American Christians.
Yes.
Not go in a slightly wrong direction, but become a source of real horror for the rest of this country, now pushing very directly in the direction of theocracy. These are folks who want to replace our Constitution, smash democracy so they can always win elections and challenge everything else is stolen. Yes. All news they don't like is fake news, deny climate change, deny women their rights, roll back all concessions to the gay community. How can this all be happening on yours and my watch? And my family directly culpable in some ways, having been in on the beginnings of the religious right in the 70s and 80s. I mean, I think this is the heaviest moment that I've experienced in American history in my life. And I'm pushing 70, not that old, but there's been nothing equivalent to this. Even the assassinations of the president and Bobby Kennedy don't come close to this. It's in my view, in terms of a darkness that surrounds us.
You know, it is the only question that keeps me up at night is how did we get here? Yeah. And I think if you look at that story about the plane and the pilot and the crashing,
the rapture story,
there's so much evidence. There's so much biblical scholarship. There's so much testimony that this is not what anyone intended. But certain Christians are attracted to this kind of idea that there are going to be some good guys that win and some bad guys that lose, and we have to be the good guys that win. You know, so I've been trying to read like How Democracies Die or The Appeal of Totalitarianism. I've been trying to read the poets like Carolyn Forche, Natalie Diaz, Joy Harjo, Kevin Young's new book about African-American poetry, to take refuge in that group of people who are painting a picture of the spiritual life and the religious life that is not based on winners and losers, that is not based on the good guys and the bad guys. James Baldwin. But I don't know how it happened. And I don't know why I continue to hold on to the Christian paradigm, but I do.
Yeah.
You know, because I do think the Jesus story has something to instruct us in opposition to the very dynamics you're talking about, in opposition to misogyny, in opposition to homophobia, in opposition to totalitarianism. And I am hopeful and even optimistic in the face of all of that. I wasn't there for the Kennedy deaths. I wasn't there for Malcolm's death or Martin's, you know, but it seems like this is about as dark a period as I can imagine. What Texas did with voting rights, I don't even know where to begin with that except send a check to ACLU. I don't even know what to do. But what I do know is if somebody in Texas needs an abortion, my minister wife and I will house them if they need a place to stay, if they need to come to Colorado, which is just up the road.
Well, you know, it's interesting because the darkest period of my life as an adult that I can remember was when my son John went right into the Marine Corps after high school, and then 9/11 happened and he was in combat in Afghanistan. And I spent 2 years, I mean, he did this as a high school lark before 9/11. And then, of course, we went right into a whole other moment of history in this endless war. But the funny thing is, I never felt as threatened as I do by the Trump phenomena and what has happened since, in that I was facing a personal tragedy, but I didn't feel like the world around me was collapsing.
Yes.
And now everything that you see, including my grandchildren I care for and others, feels threatened by this moment when America doesn't seem to be America anymore. I have a question for you, and then I want you to read something to us.
Sure.
You're part of the progressive movement. You're a Unitarian minister. You're a chaplain. You've written these books, contemplative books. This is not a loaded question, and I really don't have the answer. This is an actual question.
Okay.
I want to plumb your wisdom as a chaplain and a man of God.
Yes.
Do you think that the progressive American movement, broadly described, much of which is in the Democratic Party, a lot perhaps outside, involves religious people, secular people, and so forth and so on, are we progressives up to the challenge of this moment? Do we have what it takes to first stand firm and then, more importantly, provide viable alternatives, and at the same time change a few minds so that it becomes incontestable when votes are cast that that election was won? Or are we not up to it? Because sometimes I think we're not up to it. Other times I'm hopeful. And
Right.
I'm asking you for a serious opinion, off the record, as if no one's watching. This is just
You and me. Yeah, as I said, I'm hopeful and I'm optimistic.
Can you tell me
I've only
why?
worked, yeah, I've only worked in politics and religion, you know. Here's what I write at the end of Seeds of Devotion about the way I think is forward. It's
Hold the cover up again for us. Seeds of Devotion. I want you guys to get the book. Roger Betts is a wise, kind, good man. There aren't enough of those. Read his book, please. And in the meantime, read us something out of it. Tell us where it's out of.
It's on page 227. This is the very end, and this is the most political part of this, but it's called On Staying Sane in a Time of Great Divisiveness. And I start with Psalm 1:1. Blessed are the ones who have grown beyond themselves and have seen through their separateness. And I start with, sometimes the US seems like it's in the midst of a cold civil war. Obviously it is, and it's getting hotter and hotter. A challenge, yes, but not impossible. Here's what progressives have to do to have a chance, okay? This is just my take. Don't hunt every rabbit. Don't hunt every rabbit. We've got to get serious about what's really, really most important as progressives. And that is the bolstering of democracy at this point. That is what we have to get on. Don't hunt every rabbit. When I was first in ministry 20 years ago, I was chasing after this issue and this issue and this issue. And I finally came to a place, because of the Catholic workers, because of Dorothy Day, because of Merton, where I was like, all right, I'm into centering prayer. That's my thing. And the death penalty is my issue. And, you know, gay and lesbian rights as well. But keep with your practices. If the progressive movement is to make a dent, we have to be in touch with our deepest, truest selves. And that means whether we're religious or spiritual or not, we have to have some practices that keep us grounded in hope, not anger, in love, not fear, okay? Easy to act out of fear, easy to act out of anger. But we have to know this. The third thing is know your story. If you're going to be an activist, if you're going to be a progressive, if you're going to know then it's important to know why you're doing what you're doing, because otherwise you're going to encounter again and again and again these blind spots that will trip you up, and you'll dehumanize the very people that you're trying to humanize, right? If you begin to dehumanize those people, you've already lost the game. And then keep your eye on the vision. The vision is greater democracy, greater access to democracy. And keep your eyes on the vision. Who is on your vision board, right? So on my vision board, Oscar Romero, Dorothy Day, Bonhoeffer, Howard Thurman, Carl Sandburg, right? And then this is the most important thing. Stay connected to the other. In a democracy, there are no enemies. There are opponents and you got to have some rugby-like physical contact, but there are no enemies. If we can stay in touch with the other, then we have a chance. We have hope. That's where I ground my hope, Frank. And I am horribly naive, but my boss was Terry Sanford. You know, when I worked in the Senate, Terry Sanford was my boss. He wasn't the greatest progressive, but he was pretty good. And what he taught me was what Teresa of Avila taught me: humility and self-awareness. Humility and self-awareness. That's the doorway to any of the rest of this depth. You want to hear a prayer?
Yes, please read one and hold the book up again. Tell us what it is.
Deeds of Devotion.
Deeds of Devotion by Roger Butts.
Yes, and thank you, Frank. I loved having you come out to Colorado Springs, and I know that Jeff Scholes is going to be watching this. He is my partner in crime, bringing out all these folks. So we'll get you out here when that.
Well, listen, like I say, the book will be out November 2, and there's only a few things I've done in public, and I've done, as you well know, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of things. But the one in Colorado Springs and a couple others over my lifetime stand out. And it's always sort of a point of comparison. Like, I wish it could be like that. I don't know what the deal was. What did you guys do? Everybody who you wanted there was in the library. First of all, I love a library setting.
Right.
It's my favorite place to do something. I did one in Kansas City once at the public library. It's all my second favorite or first favorite, right up there in the Mark Twain Center up there on the top floor. Something about a public library and being a writer, better than a college, better than a church, better than any place else, better than a bookstore by far. A public library just is wonderful if you can pull a big crowd. So you guys chose a wonderful venue, but then, a tribute to you, the caliber of the people you pulled in and the beauty of the whole event just stuck with me. So even if it's a Zoom equivalent, you guys, are people that I'd really look to help me get the word out on this. I just hope something can come to mind, even in the COVID thing. Okay.
Yes, we will.
Now we'll get to the prayer on page what?
Page 45 right now, and then page 108, but 45. This is after a chapter called God Say a Word, in which I lament, in the Bible all the time, and then God said this, and then God said that. I'm like, wait, why doesn't that happen to me? The closest I come to it is like a time in DC when I was driving out to see my best friends in the suburbs, and it was Thanksgiving and a beautiful day, and the Indigo Girls were on the CD player. That's the closest I've gotten to God so far. Listen, be quiet, be still, be gentle, relax your jaw, loosen your shoulders. Listen, be gentle, be still, be quiet. Let the silence and the stillness make sacred the place you're in right now. Look at the light or the table or the cloud or the moon or the sun or the wild wind through the wild trees. They too are a sacred text. Listen, be still, be gentle, be quiet. The world does not need your words. Let your mind crawl into your heart space and let it take a nap for a little while. There's nothing to think. There's nothing to know. Surrender to that silence. Let a still quiet gently keep you just for a while. Amen.
Amen.
Yeah, I have because I'm ADD-ish and ridiculously spastic and random. I have come to a place of loving the silence and loving the stillness. On page 108, a different kind of thing, but I think every religion needs to say this at the end of the day. This is after a reflection on Thomas Merton's Epiphany, in which he realizes that he loves all these people. He can't be separate from them, and that he wished he could stop and tell each one of them that they're beautiful and they shine bright as the sun. What a beautiful message. This is my prayer after that story. You are loved. See, this is what I had to, I don't know about you, but I was so angry at what I felt to be a religious betrayal, or so unsure if I was okay. My brother-in-law is an evangelical minister in the Midwest, and I love him to death. And one time when I was just like changing into a more progressive religious person, I was sitting there arguing with him over dinner. And finally, he gave me the best favor. He did me the best favor. He was like, Roger, what do you want from me? Right? I wanted to know that I was okay. I wanted to know I was still loved. I wanted to know that this wasn't going to be horrible.
Yeah.
But it was the best thing to say, what do you want from me? And I was like, oh yeah, why am I going on and on about this?
Yeah.
You are loved. Go to the altar of your life, to the place known only to you and your God. Go there like it's a monastic cell, the kind the desert fathers insisted was all you need.
Mm-hmm.
Go there and just be quiet for long enough to hear something. Maybe at first the something you hear will be nonsense or nothing much to write home about, but soon the message will come. Clear as a waterfall, clear as the morning sun. You are loved, you are worthy, you are precious, you are enough. You are the beloved and the beautiful, and you are enough. Go, be quiet, and know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great. People are going to appreciate this when they get this book and read these prayers in that quiet place you describe.
It's the only hope.
Take them.
It's the only hope.
Yeah. When you look at the course of your own life and the changes you've made, and you look forward, it seems to me that I'm always sort of at a step in a journey. Yes. And you kind of wonder a little bit, as you have less time ahead of you, as I do at this point, yes, than behind me.
Yes.
How that journey will end. But there's an interesting thing that's happened to me in that as I'm pushing 70 here.
Yes.
Is the relief at actually having most of your story in the past. I know you deal a lot with people who are ill and terminal and who have died as a chaplain. But the funny thing is, I was telling my granddaughter Amanda the other day on the way back from Wild Goose, she did half the driving, brought me down. She's 28 now. And I said, something that I never expected when I was younger.
Yes.
You always talk about sort of fear of death, is that one of the great blessings of getting older is this, and that I've lived so much of my life in fear, yes, in the sense of, I'm a writer, can I earn a living? Will I ever have any money to put my kids in college? Yes. I've left the evangelical fold. There's people who don't speak to me. How's this all going to end? All the things that you fear, but they were all projections into the future.
Yes.
How will I earn my living? How will I do? I have a temper. Am I going to have a fight with my wife where she finally leaves me for good instead of just walking out and then coming back and we make up?
Yes.
It is a relief to get to a point of your life where most of your life is in the past, because you know how that story ends. And I never foresaw that. I never foresaw that it would be a relief to be old enough to say, you know what? The years Jeannie and I have been together, my relationship with children and grandchildren, the couple of books I've written that I still think are good books, not all of them, but the couple that I've written that I still stand by, can't be taken away. This is, I've had those experiences. It's such a relief to not have so much left in the future.
That's right.
And I never foresaw that. And speaking to you as a hospital chaplain, yes, does that ring true in terms of some of your experiences in dealing with older people?
Oh my God, yeah. When I walk into a room and somebody, whether they're young or older, and when I walk into a room, what do I find? People who want to tell me about their great loves, people who want to tell me about their great passions, people who are like, nope, I didn't do it perfectly, and here's something I really regret, but for the most part, I made it through. And this is what I want to tell to the young people. It's like, look, right now it looks rough. Right now, but you're going to make it through, and you're stronger than you think. I love hearing stories about people's simple loves, like, well, we met at a country dance hall in, the middle of nowhere. And somehow she put up with me for all this time. And that's a great way to make a living. I didn't know what I was going to be when I was a kid. My mom didn't finish high school. My dad was a truck driver manager, like he told people where to go. Like I didn't have a whole lot to count on, but I had these other relatives who were doing ministry, who were teaching, who were doing some writing. And so I kind of knew where I wanted to head. But God, it's been a rough road many times.
Looking back at your time as a chaplain, but also just as a pastor and then human experience, do you feel that, just as I've shared this little insight that I've had more recently, and by the way, that runs through my book under the surface, in the sense that the stories I tell in that book are all related to the experience of being a grandfather. Because it's from that perspective. And so the book is very sciencey at places, and I talk about evolutionary biology, and I had to read a lot of books that my sciencey friends told me to read.
Oh my God.
As they corrected it. So it took 6 years to do this project, and usually a book of mine takes a couple of years. But I'm wondering if you have changed your own perspective on your own aging. And even, let's go to the big one, death itself, by dealing with so many people in a chaplaincy position. Can you bring some insights that you've learned? In other words, how you've not changed your mind, maybe your feelings, your emotions, as the years have gone on. How do you feel differently now than you did before you had this intense experience in hospitals with COVID patients and these other folks?
Yeah, I mean, before I didn't have a whole lot of exposure to death. I had some because I was a pastor, but in the last 7 years, I've seen it. The people who hold lightly the idea that they're going to die, the people who have been able to find some perspective, they just go gently into that period. The one thing that I've seen, powerful people, poor people, connected people, disconnected people, the thing that everybody wants is to know that they're loved. And if you can go into that great mystery of death with a sense, I loved as well as I knew how to. Some people loved me. And I didn't get, famous. I didn't get this or that. I'm not going to be a rich person, but that this is just another part of living. And the spiritual traditions and all the religions say that we die and then we live. We die and then we live. So somehow this energy is going to get reconfigured. We don't know how or why.
Conversely, but not to go to too dark a place, and I know you're in the middle of a thought. What about the flip side of that, in the sense that when you encounter a life that was all about material success, that then sacrificed the relationships in this kind of brutalist survival of the fittest instead of the survival of the friendliest, which is, by the way, where all the science is today, which I have in my book, emphasizing the quality of your relationships are so much more important than our definition of material success. That's what my book is about.
Right.
What happens when you run into someone who either hasn't listened to you, didn't read my book, had circumstances in which they were sold this bill of goods where they've always put love off and connection to do this big important thing that in the end turned out to be garbage or nothing that was really serious? Have you encountered that? And what do you say to such people who have that sense of void and don't have the connections as they face real crises? And by the way, may not be in old age. I mean, younger people get things too.
Oh, absolutely.
But I don't want to go to a dark fundamentalist place of warning, but I just want you to talk a little about that. I mean,
I've had people share with me their regrets, and it's a joke, it's a cliche, but it's true. Nobody says, boy, I wish I had stayed at the office longer on Mondays and Wednesdays and Fridays. Nobody says it. Now, what I have seen is those people who have an understanding that their privilege and their money enabled them to be supportive of their loved ones. They have to have a proper perspective about it. But it's the ones who are like 30 and have gotten cancer, or the ones who just reached retirement age and said, what did I do all that for? I really wanted to be this, and I missed the boat. Those are the toughest ones, and you just have to find a place of healing that is emotional and spiritual. The physical healing is not going to happen, but there's still always time for emotional and spiritual healing to happen, and to reconcile in your own spirit that you did the best you could with what you had. And people see that. Mostly people come to the end of their death and they're pretty comfortable with it. But boy, we've got to get better about talking about death and being comfortable with it, and saying, like, look, I think, like when my grandmother was born, for instance, I think the families would just gather in a house, and there would be the deceased person in the house in the sitting room or something. And we try to bury it so much. It's like homeless people. We try to get rid of them so that we don't have to see it. It's too uncomfortable. So we've got some work to do around that.
Yeah, I often think as you kind of look at the ambitions of the age we're in, you have all this talk in Silicon Valley with some of these billionaires who have started these outfits in their garage, and now they're running places like Google about trying to upload their brains to computers or go to Mars or build their own rocket ship. And the fact of the matter is, much closer to home in our relationships we have, I'm thinking about the undramatic action at the end of every evening when I walk up my drive. 3 of my young grandchildren live across the street. You'll meet them in the book. And Nora turns to me every single night and says, "Can you tell me a going home story?" And that's every evening. That's every single 5 days a week. That has been my life now. And then with Lucy before. Okay, I got to tell you something, and I'm being serious. And I've told Nora that the other day. I said, Nora, if there were 2 buttons on this table and one would give me everything that you could dream of or imagine, and the other would give me another minute with you, I would push the minute with you. That's because you're the most important thing in my life. And I'm not telling her that to build her up. That's just a straight, unvarnished truth.
That's your heart.
That's my heart. And so, and having the love of those grandchildren, and in those relationships, things fade. So, I guess what I'm trying to say to folks, through my writing and also in this conversation with you, from the point of view of a chaplain who deals with that other end of life, is that these are not touchy-feely, Oprah-esque, sentimental things. This is science, because science gave us the capacity, evolution gave us the capacity to love in order to make life feel worthwhile. Otherwise, none of us would survive.
That's right.
Parental love, and so forth and so on. I just think that if you tried to describe a culture that was built to deny us joy, the corporate profit model of career success would be that culture. I can't think of anything less conducive to joy. Now, perhaps I'm wrong, but I really think we live in a time when people are being denied basic happiness.
That's right. And not to use a term from our background too much, but it's idolatrous. When you read Cornel West and the worship of the market, it's idolatry.
It is.
Well, this is what I'll say about this relational piece, because my whole ministry is relational, whether I'm doing death penalty, anti-death penalty organizing, or chaplaincy, or parish ministry, it's all in the relationship. Can I read a prayer and then give you
Please do. In fact, actually, we're going to wind it up soon. So I want people to buy Seeds of Devotion, your book, and I want you to concentrate on getting to know this author, Roger, and listen to his words. Let's wrap up with this prayer you're going to read.
Yep.
And then whatever last word you want to share with us.
I'm going to give you a prayer, and then I'm going to give you a blessing. Is that okay?
Perfectly Wonderful.
Perfect. So the prayer, and I wanted to wrap this up with you specifically because we have come out of this tradition that is common to, you had a much bigger role in it. I was much more a participant. You were kind of a leader in it, but we've come out of it to a new place. And the question always becomes, what can we construct once we've deconstructed? And this is the closest thing I've come to the way that I like to pray in a way that's open and invitational. This prayer is after Hey You, Peace Be With You. Okay, the chapter called Hey You, Peace Be With You. This is the prayer. Allah, Buddha, Jesus, Mother Mary, God, Yahweh, Sister Dorothy Day, Brother Merton, Father Lewis, whatever your name, whoever you call, whoever you use me, call me. Here I am, Lord. Is it I, Lord? My heart is broken. My way is unclear. The path is long. My spirit is humbled. My son is hurting. My neighbor is crying. The guy under the bridge needs a meal. My spouse needs to be heard. Who am I? What can I offer? Just this, my broken heart that still beats. Thank you, thank you, thank you. My old ear that still hears. Thank you, thank you, thank you. My feet that have journeyed long that can carry me from here to there. Thank you, thank you. So carry me, God, however you do that from here to there, and I'll follow and I'll walk and I'll listen and I'll stay awake. Though the night is dark, your light will guide me.
Amen.
Yeah, that's how I've decided to pray after thinking that there's only one way to pray or a little, a few ways to pray.
Well, offer us a blessing and we will go out on that. And Roger, I thank you so much for this time. It's been wonderful talking to you. I hope to see you again in one way or another soon.
Well, yeah, absolutely. We'll get you out to Colorado Springs, however
however we do it. Well, listen, offer us the blessing and thank you for your time. And everyone, please, Seeds of Devotion, take a look, find it. And Roger, thank you for your wisdom. And thanks again for taking care of those COVID patients for us.
Oh, yeah, it's my pleasure. And it's such a blessing to be with you. Here's a blessing for you and your listeners, readers, whatever.
Thank you.
May life surprise you today. May a sense of grace come out of nowhere in the middle of your daily tasks. May a sense of peace find you in the unlikeliest of places. May a sense of courage and renewal find you. May God's love surround you, and may a gentleness, a returning quietness, and a restoring stillness be with you now and always. A restorative wholeness is yours to claim and embrace. And may faith, hope, and love be your constant companions. God bless your day. Amen.
Amen, Roger. And blessings on you too, my brother.
Thank you. And keep up the good work. I will only say that if I write that Keep the Bible Weird book.
Yeah, I'll write the forward, remember.
I want that picture behind you to be the cover. That's all I'm saying.
Okay, good. Yeah, we'll do it. I'll give you that. You've got permission to use this as the cover. Granted. I'll write a note for you. Thank you, Roger. Blessings. Much love, Roger. Much love.
Love, Frank. Take good care.
You too.